Welcome back, wizards. Step into the world of SyntaxWizards, where coding becomes not only achievable but also fun and exciting. Our mission is simple: to take you from knowing little about code to building your very first project with confidence. All it takes is the right tools, a bit of guidance, and a spark of curiosity. Today, we're diving straight into some essential coding principles that will make you feel more confident as you continue to learn and develop. Applications. We'll focus on crucial topics like naming your variables, data types, scope, constants, and best practices. This is your guide to mastering the basics and setting a strong foundation for developing clean and reliable code. Let's grab our coding wands and dive right in. Let's review the 4 key objectives for this video. 1. Naming your variables. This section will focus on giving variables clear descriptive names. We'll also cover best practices like using camel case, avoiding numbers at the start, and keeping special characters out to make your code cleaner and more readable. 2. Data types. Here, we'll look at the 4 common data types: integers, floats, strings, and booleans. These types allow us to store different forms of information and determine how they'll be used in the code. 3. Scopes. We'll dive into variable scopes: global, local, and block scope. Understanding scope helps us control where our variables live and ensures they are accessible only where they're needed, which keeps code organized and avoids unexpected issues. 4. Constants and variables. Finally, we'll explore constants and variables. We'll discuss when to use each, especially when we need certain values like configuration settings to stay the same throughout our program. Our first objective: naming your variables. In this topic, we will be covering 4 areas. It consists of, firstly, be descriptive, use camel case, avoid starting with numbers. With that out of the way, let's dive right in. Be descriptive. Use names that make sense, like total amount or user age. In the code, it will look something like this. Let's start by creating a new file from the panel at the top and name its variables.js. Let's start by inserting let. This is known as the variable type. Then, to use a useful and descriptive variable name, we can insert a name, for example, result, and semicolon. This would be the case if we were creating a calculator application and to display the result of the calculation. Next up, use camel case. An example would be if we were to write player score instead of player score or player underscore score. This is the most common naming style in many programming languages. So, after using a descriptive name, we want to use camel case variable names. This is to make the name more identifiable and readable in the code. To do this, we will execute something similar as before, but with a small twist. In the previous case, we used result as the variable name. To make it more readable, we can replace it with something like calculated result. Next up, avoid starting with numbers. Variable names can't start with numbers. So instead of one score, use score. Let's start by inserting let. Then in this case, now let's insert a variable name with a number at the start. As you can see, this returns an error. This indicates that the inserted variable name is not allowed and incorrect. To do this, what we can do is to either delete the number or to reposition the number to the back of the variable. This will remove the number from being at the start of the variable name. Now there are no more errors. Next up, no special characters. Stick to letters, numbers, and underscores. Let's start by inserting let, then followed by the variable name. However, in this case, let's insert a variable name with a special character. Special characters can be an exclamation mark, or it could be a question mark. Now you can observe that it returns an error. This means that the inserted variable is not allowed. In this situation, what we can do is to remove the special characters. Moving the special characters to the back does not work. Now time for a quiz. Here is Thomas. He will be guiding you as you take the quizzes. For each quiz, you have 10 seconds to read and pick the correct answer from the MCQ. Now for our first question. When naming variables in programming, which of the following practices is recommended for readability and to avoid errors? Option A. Start variable names with numbers to make them unique. Option B. Use descriptive names and camel case like player score instead of score. Option C. Include special characters like exclamation marks or question marks in variable names for clarity. Option D. Use short, random names like X, Y, or Z for all variables. If you chose option B, you're absolutely correct. As we learned earlier in this series, variables should use descriptive names and camel case for better readability. Into our second objective, data types. In this topic, we will be covering 4 areas. It consists of integers, floats, strings, and booleans. With that out of the way, let's dive right in. Our first data type is integers. Integers are whole numbers such as 1, 10, and 24. Let's start by inserting let, then the variable name. For now, let's insert the variable name age, followed by equals, and then the variable value 10. This indicates that the age variable has been assigned the value 10. This essentially makes age an integer data type. Next up, floats. Floats are decimals. Some examples of decimals are 3.14 and 98.6. Let's start by then the variable name. For now, let's insert the variable name pi, followed by equals then 3.14. This indicates that the pi variable has been assigned the value 3.14. This will make pi a float data type. Next up, strings, used for text and characters, which we wrap in quotes. Let's start by inserting let, then the variable name. For now, let's insert the variable name author, followed by equals and the variable value as hello world. This indicates that the author variable has been assigned the string hello world. This will make the author variable a string. Since this is a string data type, we can also include special characters in the text area as seen in this example. This will not affect the execution of the string. Next up, booleans. These are true or false values. They're perfect for situations with 2 possible outcomes. Let's start by inserting let, then the variable name. For now, let's insert the variable name is logged in, followed by equals and true. This indicates that the isLoggedIn variables has been assigned a true value. This will make the isLoggedIn variable a boolean. Do take note that a boolean only has 2 values, true or false. Each data type helps the program know how to use and process the information. For instance, you can perform math with numbers, but not with strings. Data types are a great way to keep your code clean and organized. Now time for a quiz. Which of the following correctly describes the purpose of Boolean data types in programming? Option A. Boolean store whole numbers like 1, 10, and 24. Option B. Strings store decimals like 3.14 and 98.6. Option C. Booleans store true or false values. Option D. Integers store true or false values. If you chose option C, you're absolutely correct. As we learned earlier in this series, Booleans have only 2 possible values, true or false. Our third objective, scopes. In this topic, we will be covering 3 areas. It consists of global scope, local scope, and last but not least, block scope. With that out of the way, let's dive right in. Now, let's talk about scope. Scope is where your variables live and how accessible they are within your code. Knowing about scope helps prevent unexpected errors and keeps your code organized. First up, global scope. A variable in the global scope is accessible anywhere in your code. You create a global variable simply by declaring it outside of any function or block. Let's start by inserting let. Next, the variable name. For this example, we will use game name, followed by equals and the string wizard dual. Now, game name is accessible anywhere in your program. Next up, local scope. Local scope means a variable is only available in a specific part of your code, such as inside a function or block of code. Let's start by declaring a function. This can be done by inserting function followed by the function name. Insert let followed by the variable name player ready, followed by equals and then true. Next, we will include a print statement, console.log. Inside console.log, we will include the player ready string and include the player ready boolean initialized earlier. Outside of the function, the start game function is called. However, notice that the player ready boolean cannot be found. This is because it is in a local scope. In this case, player ready is only available inside the start game function. If you try to access player ready outside of start game, you'll get an error. This is useful for keeping variables contained within certain parts of your code, which helps prevent bugs and makes your code easier to manage. Next up, block scope. JavaScript, for example, also has block scope with keywords like let and const, meaning any variable declared within curly braces is only accessible within that block. Let's start by inserting if with the true value. This indicates that if true is the current state, then execute the following codes. Then insert let, followed by magic spell, then equals, followed by the string invisibility. Then outside of the if bracket, include a print statement. In code, it will look something like this: console log, magic spell. This will return an error, as magic spell is out of scope. Knowing the difference between global and local scope is key for controlling where and how you use variables in your programs. Now time for a quiz. Which statement about variable scope is correct? Option A. Block scope variables declared with let or const are only accessible within. Option B. Global variables are only accessible in functions. Option C. Local variables are accessible everywhere. Option D. Block scope variables are accessible outside the block. If you chose option A, you're absolutely correct. As we learned earlier in this course, in block scope, variables that declared either with a let or const are only accessible within the boundaries of the parameters they are in. On to our last objective, constants and variables. In this topic, we will be covering two areas. It consists of variable and constant. With that out of the way, let's dive right in. Alright, now let's talk about the difference between constants and variables. A variable, as we've seen, can change throughout your program. For instance, a player's score might increase or decrease. For reference, let's first declare a variable. Let's start by inserting let, followed by the variable name. For now, let's insert player score followed by equals and then the 10 as the variable value. However, a constant is a value that should never change once it's set, like pi in mathematics. To declare a constant, you use the const keyword. Here is an example of pi. Let's start by inserting const followed by pi, then equals followed by 3.14, and once you've set a constant like pi, you can't change its value. If you try, you'll get an error. Constants are incredibly useful for values that should stay fixed, like configuration settings or mathematical values. They're also great for preventing accidental changes that could introduce bugs. Using constants wherever possible is a great habit, as it makes your code easier to understand and protects it from accidental errors. Now, time for a quiz. What is the key difference between a variable and a constant? Option A. Variables cannot change, but constants can. Option B. Constants cannot change once set, but variables can. Option C. Variables and constants are both unchangeable. Option D. Constants are only used for numbers. If you chose option B, you're absolutely correct. As we learned earlier in this course, constants cannot be changed and are permanent. However, on the other hand, variable values can change, but it has its limitations as well. The same variable names cannot be created twice. And there you have it, wizards. Today, we covered some of the most important concepts in working with variables, like naming, data types, scope, constants, and best practices. Remember, variables are one of the most powerful tools in programming. They let you store, manage, and manipulate data in ways that make your code efficient and dynamic. And with these best practices, you'll be writing cleaner, error-free code in no time. If you enjoyed this guide, don't forget to give us a thumbs up, subscribe, and leave a comment on what coding magic you'd like to learn next. Until then, keep casting those coding spells with SyntaxWizards.